And see all of you, so many friends. It's deeply meaningful to see the lives and the memories of those who are suffering day after day after day be recalled by all of you, and I'm honored to be asked to speak with you. I'm here today as someone who has lost friends on October 7th, colleagues in the peace camp that many of you know. I'm here as someone whose family is called up and fighting, as I'm sure is the case with many of you. And I'm here as a representative of J Street, the American partner to Israelis who seek peace and who seek security, who seek democracy. And we have been proud to work with Unxeptable over the course of the pre-October 7th period to stand and defend Israeli democracy. And so I'm happy to be here as a representative of J Street to stand with you. Since October 7th, since the very first day, first hours, J Street has stood with the people in the state of Israel. And we recognize the right of Israel to respond militarily to this heinous terror attack by Hamas. We support the country's right to defend itself and its territory from those who would do it harm, but within the bounds of international law. We respect the right as well to hold those who carried out this heinous attack to account. That's all proper and right within international law. And we are appalled, simply appalled, by all those within the American community and sometimes even within the American Jewish community who have refused to recognize and refused to keep front and center the horror, not only of what happened on October 7th, but what the hostages are continuing to endure today. The hostages whose stories we have come to know as individuals and people, and whose suffering we understand. They are suffering, their families are suffering, the entirety of the nation and the people of Israel are suffering and in trauma. J Street recognizes as well the human suffering on the other side of this conflict. We can't let that go unsaid. Thousands of Palestinian civilians, many children, have been killed, are injured. There are hundreds of thousands who are displaced and who lack some of the basic necessities of life. The criminals who launched the October 7th attack, they knew exactly what Israel's response would be. And they knew what it would mean for their own people. And not only didn't that stop them, it was in fact part of their twisted strategy as they built a sophisticated network of tunnels and a terror network beneath hospitals and schools and mosques and homes. They knew that the suffering of their own people could be weaponized in their warped campaign to end, not to end occupation, but to defeat the state of Israel. That is an abysmal failure of leadership. But there's an abysmal failure of leadership on both sides of this conflict. On the Israeli side, the serial failures of this Israeli government, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, they played a large role, as you all know, in enabling the tragedy of October 7th. You know the story, the failures of intelligence leading up to the day, the failures of security on the day. And I would argue, to my mind, the most important, the strategic failure over years and maybe even decades. The same government that failed to understand and comprehend what Hamas was capable of doing believed that the conflict could be managed, that it was wise to provide cash in suitcases to Hamas, while denying legitimate tax revenues to the PA. That same government, as you all know, spent the first part of 2023 tearing apart the pillars of Israeli democracy. Well, they failed to provide for Israel's security, they failed to protect Israel's democracy, and the failure continues today when it comes to the hostages. The lives and well-being of the hostages must be priority number one for the Israeli government. Priority number one. And as was mentioned earlier, member of the War Cabinet and former IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot this week made it very clear that that has not been the case. For over 100 days, the military operation that has brought devastation to Gaza and damaged Israel's position in this country and around the world has not brought us closer to seeing the hostages brought home. To paraphrase Ecclesiastes, there is a time for war, and there is a time for diplomacy. The time for diplomacy is now. General Eisenkot made it clear this week the time has come to try a different approach to saving the lives of the hostages, and that is the path of negotiations and diplomacy. Only a negotiated stop in the fighting, only with that stop will all the remaining hostages be able to return home. And the sooner the better, as we all know about their deteriorating health and about the increasing risks that they face every single day. A negotiated stop to the fighting will also allow for a surge in humanitarian aid and assistance, food, water, medicines, and other necessities of life that hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza need right now to ensure that there is not mass starvation and outbreaks of disease. My friends, it is time for diplomacy, time to bring the hostages home, time to end the suffering, not only of Israelis, but of Palestinians as well. There will be time, and there must be time down the road for further action to hold the criminals accountable who perpetrated the horror of October 7th. None of us want to see them escape accountability for their action. But for today, let's call together to start the talking, stop the fighting, and work for new leadership in Israel that can reverse the legacy of failure and put the country back on a path to long-term peace and security.